Hello, future educators. Today we're going to look at one of the absolutely core um, basic key sort of starting psychologists or educational theorists that there is, and that's behaviourists. So behaviourists were one of the first psychologists to develop, or school of psychology to develop theories. And there are two. There's Pavlov and there's Skinner. And we're going to start by looking at Pavlov. So we have Pavlov who looked at something called classical conditioning. So this is Pavlov there looking very dapper with his beard and moustache, and the picture should give you a feel for perhaps how long ago this theory is. However, the core basic principles of the theory still apply, and possibly as I explain this to you, and for some of you may have come across this before in psychology or GCSE science or one of your other subjects as well. You might start to be able to identify and think of certain behaviours. So Pavlov said that we learnt all of our behaviours through association. So this is the idea that if two things were paired together and then they were learnt to be associated, and then one of them could be removed and you would still see the same behaviour. Don't panic if that doesn't make sense. Pavlov loved dogs. Loved using dogs in experiments, not convinced he loved dogs, possibly by the way he uses experiments if you look in a bit more detail. And also he did a couple of experiments on, Pavlov was a Russian and he used Russian orphans. But moving slightly away from that, we have Pavlov and his dogs here. So in the first one, you have the natural experience of a dog. So you've got a dog here, he sees some food and he starts to salivate. So if you have a dog at home, you've probably seen that, or possibly maybe some younger siblings, you might have seen that in them as well. So the food appears and the dog salivates. So that's a natural response that the dog automatically has. When the dog has a bell rung, nothing happens. It's a dog, doesn't really know anything about bells. It's just hears a noise and there's no response. So there's the dog not really doing anything. When you pair the food and the bell together, so when you ring the bell at the same time as you present the food to the dog is going to salivate. These two things are being associated together, so paired together, these two stimulus. Eventually, after classical conditioning, you can remove the thing that previously caused the response, so you can remove the food. And yet, because the dog associated the food with the bell, whenever the dog hears the bell, the dog salivates. Okay, there is some, well, I was going to say complicated, not too complicated, and psychology students, you'll be familiar with the terminology. There is some complicated terminology that goes alongside this, but ultimately that is it. If you pair two stimulus together and then you remove one of the stimulus, then you should still get a response from the other one. So we had the dog who naturally salivated when he saw the food, wasn't interested, didn't respond to the bell. Pair the food and the bell together, the dog will salivate. Eventually you can get rid of the food and the dog will still salivate to the sound of the bell, which was something that the dog didn't do previously. So again, if you have animals, then you might know that you think about how they respond not to the food, but to the cupboard, to the food door being open, or when you touch a tin that has food in it, or if you think about how excited they get when you shout walkies. So initially they wouldn't be excited by that at all. However, they've learnt to associate the sound of the word walkies with the experience of going for a walk. Or they might hear the lead move. So at first they wouldn't have been excited by the lead, but they love going out for walks. You've paired going out for a walk with the lead. So eventually you could just show them the lead and they'd get really excited. Okay. So this is a bit of an old school one. It perhaps seems a little bit obvious to you, but it is quite a key one that you just want to be aware of. Behaviorism has its place and it's useful to know, but just I'm sure already as critical thinkers, you can think carefully about in and of itself, it's not a unique or the best theory to use completely independently within the classroom. So what I would like you to do is your reflective task. I would like you to consider your own learning in the classroom. And this doesn't just mean concrete knowledge, so times tables or where countries are on the map. It means it can also apply, and probably more significantly applies, to your actual behaviour, so how you behave within the classroom. So the first question you want to consider: how have you been classically conditioned to behave in the classroom? So think about some of the behaviours you display and your experiences throughout the whole of your educational life. Have you been trained to associate something with something else? Okay. And they could be positive behaviours. So a lot of A-level students are extremely well, without even realising it, classically conditioned to behave in a certain way within the classroom. So have a think about that. And you can broaden it out slightly more. Now, this possibly doesn't fit with, I suppose it does, with classical conditioning, but do you have any associations with the classroom? So when you think about different classrooms, so was there a teacher who did a certain thing? So they played a certain music, and whenever you hear that music, you associate it with them? Or are there certain things within the environment that you associate with a certain teacher? And of course, they can be both good and they can be bad. So, and I want you to think about how that impacted you as a learner. So can you think maybe of some good experiences you had with really good teachers, and any associations you made with them? Did that have a positive impact on you? So thinking about how you felt when you saw a teacher, and then maybe generally when you're in that teacher's classroom, even when the teacher was there, how did you feel about them? And also, and then consider how that might impact learners that you are going to work with. So is there anything you can use, any classical conditioning you use to encourage your learners, particularly if you're thinking of working with mature learners, possibly at university? Do you think there's some negative associations with the classroom, and how might that impact and close somebody off to learning? Okay. And then your application task will be to start to create your own classroom, school, educational environment, university, nursery, playroom, whatever it is. Start creating it. And I'd like you to consider either how would you incorporate classical conditioning? So how might you classically condition your students? And how might you consider pre-existing classical conditioning and how it might impact your learners? So like I said, in previous years, have students learned to associate certain things with possibly not the nicest experience, and how might it impact your learners? So when I'm sure when teachers at college teach GCSE English and maths to adults, so maybe an adult that hasn't been in the classroom for 20 years, adults might have had some really negative experiences that they associate with sitting in a classroom, and how might that impact them? Does that close them off? If they're feeling negative when they walk in already, will it stop them going to the class at all? Or might it affect the way that they behave within the classroom? So you can think of both of or either of those. And what you might want to do is have a chat with, if there's any adults at home, ask them about what they associate with school and see if they've got any classically conditioned behaviours or feelings or experiences or responses that they might have. Okay.